Today we're going to talk about America in the 1950s. We're going to start by talking about the Eisenhower years. 1952 was a presidential election year, and Harry S. Truman decided he did not want to run for president again, and so a hero that everyone recognized from World War II threw his hat in the ring. Pretty tough to beat. That's Dwight D. Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower was the first Republican president elected since 1928. If you remember, Franklin Roosevelt was elected in 32. He was elected 4 times and died during his 4th term, and Harry Truman took over. Of course, he was a Democrat, and so he served 2 terms. So when Eisenhower was elected, he was the first Republican to be elected since 1928. Most people considered Eisenhower a moderate. What we mean by that is not very liberal, not very conservative, kind of middle of the road. But he definitely wanted to make the federal government smaller. That was important to him. The one area he did not want to make smaller was our highways. In fact, that was his biggest domestic program. In 1956, he decided to spend millions of dollars to link our country from state to state by building 40,000 miles worth of highways. This is going to have a huge impact on our country in many different ways. Number one, it's going to employ thousands and thousands of people to put them to work to build these highways. It's also going to link states and help people to transport goods from one state to another. So that's going to be a big boom for our economy as well. There's also some downsides though. More cars on the road, more pollution. What's that going to do to our environment? It's also going to mean that people are going to move out of their cities and into the suburbs because they now have roads at which they can travel to get from home to work, and that's going to cause some pains for our inner cities. Move on and talk about the United States-Soviet relations. We know that since after World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union have been engaging in this Cold War, trying to prove that they are stronger and more powerful than the next guy. We know that the Soviet Union is trying to spread communism to places in Europe and Asia, while the United States is trying to stop that. At the same time, though, they're also building up their weapons in what we call an arms race, each side trying to make bigger, more dangerous weapons. But as we get to the mid-1950s, this gets kind of scary. The world sees what's going on and makes people nervous. So in 1955, Dwight Eisenhower and Nikita Khrushchev decided to get together in Geneva, Switzerland to have a meeting. It's called the Geneva Summit. And what they wanted to do was to agree to peacefully coexist. What I mean by that is work together, not get in a war, but we don't have to be friends. We can compete, but we don't want to go to war. We're going to see a great example of that with the space program. And in 1957, the Soviet Union will launch the first satellite into space called Sputnik. That will first scare Americans because people don't know what it is and what it's meant to do, and is it going to attack from space? But it's also going to spur us to increase our own attention to math and science, and to fund math and science and try to beef up those programs in our schools. And in fact, it will encourage us to be the first country to put a man on the moon. With all of the good things going on in the 1950s, our economy is definitely going to grow. Hiring people to build highways in the part of the Highway Act. With this arms race, we're going to continue to make weapons. So there's going to be a lot of jobs out there. With lots of jobs means lots of money. And when people have money, they spend it. And before you know it, we have a booming economy, which as a result will create something called a baby boom. When families have lots of money, they feel that they can have lots of kids. And that's what happens in the 1950s. Now, technically, the baby boom is from 1946 to 1964. Right after World War II, we have our returning soldiers coming home and starting out their families. And before you know it, families are getting bigger and bigger. Along with these growing families, consumers are going to start to want new products like cars and televisions. different cars and this new product called television. It's going to change the way America lives in the 1950s. And also there'll be this new form of music called rock and roll, very popular with teenagers. People like Elvis Presley and Bill Haley and the Comets and Buddy Holly and Chuck Berry and Little Richard, all popular in the 1950s. But not everyone does well in the 1950s. One area that we really see struggle is farmers. Large farms are beginning to drive out that small family farm. Also, we're seeing more farmers give up farming and move to the suburbs, where jobs are plentiful and they can find new kinds of work. And before you know it, our suburbs are growing and getting bigger. We also see businesses moving to the suburbs. This is not good for our inner cities, because when the jobs move out of the inner cities, people who are living in the city have no place to work. And that's going to become a problem and create these islands of poverty. Now, people at the end of the decade are beginning to criticize the way American society is in the 1950s. People feel we're becoming too materialistic, focusing more on accumulating money and possessions rather than on what's really important. One area that we're really going to see change is that with women and African Americans. By the end of the 1950s, women are going to start to question if there isn't more to life than just staying at home and taking care of children. And African Americans are going to start to question why they don't have the same opportunities as white Americans. And in 1954, the famous Brown versus Board of Education case will change the civil rights movement in this country forever.